Hello everyone, we're going to be talking about assessment today, and we certainly live in a high accountability time for education, and assessment is one of the key ways that we can be accountable. So we're going to talk about the different terms just to make sure that when you're in a school that you're not confusing the different terms. They are very specific. All right, first of all, as background, you really need to be sure that you understand why we evaluate students. What's the purpose? And there are six different reasons that are typically given for the assessment of students, whether it's through tests or other tools. Probably priority is that we're giving feedback for students. We want students to know where they stand, how they're doing. A significant amount of research that says that the way that you give feedback to students is critical to their motivation and their ongoing success. So the reason to evaluate students is to actually let them know how they're doing. Secondly, it's to let us know how we're doing. The measure of a teacher, I think, is the success of their students. And so if you assess your students and find out that they're learning something or not learning something, that is some feedback for you. Encouraging you to change your teaching methods or continue with them, or make some reflective, thoughtful decisions about your teaching. The third point there is to inform parents. We test students or evaluate their work so that we can tell parents, this is where your kid is, this is how they're doing compared to others, compared to our standards. It's information for parents so they know how to support their child better. It's also information for selection. Certainly tracking is a bad word in education. Oh, there goes my phone, of course. We're going to let that ring. Sorry, you're going to hear the phone ringing in the background. Information for selection. You need to be able to decide which students need remediation, which students need enrichment and extended classes. Having those tools to determine selection usually are tests. Okay, I'll be not so distracted now. Sorry about that. So information for selection, we have to choose which kids get which services at school, and testing is certainly one of the pieces. It should not be the only piece involved in that selection, but it does provide us with good information. We're most aware in education right now of information for accountability. We do MCA tests and all kinds of other tools to measure the success of our school for No Child Left Behind, for our state funding, and that is only one piece of the whole evaluation process, is information for accountability. The last thing that sometimes is overlooked is that evaluating students' learning can provide them with incentives to increase their effort. So kind of wrapping back to that number one with the feedback, when students know where they stand, you know 85% of your 0 to 10 multiplication facts. Well, then I want to get to 95%, or I want to get to 97%. Having that information, the tested material, can help a student increase their motivation and their effort to work. A couple of different evaluation methods that are used in schools that you need to be aware of. Most often we think of the traditional ones, assessments that are objective, usually tests. There's right or wrong. Teachers mark these with red. All right, a bunch of different test types. These two test types are the most formal tests. We're not talking about, a little quiz that a teacher gives in a classroom. These are high stakes tests. Teachers do not give aptitude tests generally. We don't give IQ tests. These are given in schools, though, by school psychologists. Students who are in process for special education will need to have an IQ test given. And aptitude tests are measuring potential. It's a prediction of skills. And these tests generally are a little more abstract, and students are not being tested on, what's a typical third grade question. It's more about problem solving and a bit with vocabulary, different kinds of skills that would predict achievement. Achievement tests, however, are something that you would be giving in your classroom. You'll be giving MCA tests. And for those of us in special ed, Woodcock-Johnson is the achievement test generally given by most schools as part of their initial evaluation process. And an achievement test tests the content or skill level of a student. And so the tests are designed to match with grade levels or ages. You would give students an MCA test designed for 5th grade if they were a 5th grade student. The same is true of the Woodcock-Johnson. You kind of adjust to where their grade level or age is, where you think their skills are. Those tests, and the Iowa Basic Skills Test as well, are matched to grade levels or ages and are measuring material that they believe students would have come in contact with at those grades. Interpretations, or the measurements that we use, there are norm-referenced tests that compare students to the performance of others. It's judging what's normal. That's not the correct use of the word there, but it's how I remember it. Norms are a psychological and statistical term that we use to rank students among other students of that same age or grade. And so a norm reference sampling would require that you collect a certain number of test results and look at them, and the activity is actually called norming. So when we compare students to what we expect of other, what's typical of a 5th grader, you would be looking at a norm referenced tool. We don't use these as classroom teachers, but a lot of the MCA tests have a normed element. Iowa Basic Skills, they show us where kids rank among other students. Criterion reference are a little bit different, and they rate how thoroughly the student has mastered whatever skill. And this is when we start looking at standards-based measurements. We have a bar that students need to reach, and they either meet that expectation or they fall below it. And that would be a criterion referenced sort of tool. Another way that we can do this is through rubrics, a specific grading scale. We use these most often with authentic assessments. We'll spend some time talking about that in a different presentation. Rubrics are a tool that teachers use to explain not only their expectations but also to grade. And so it's a grid usually of categories, and then it lists out the different qualities that the teacher is looking for, from the above expectations to below expectations. Another way to measure student work is through a rubric. Last one here is a checklist. A checklist is really not a tool for interpreting skills other than to say that a student can complete them. A checklist is much more of a to-do list. It's like a rubric, but it does not have those qualities attached. So it simply says the student can do this, can do this, can do this, and the answers are yes or no. It doesn't reflect any quality to the level of work. All right, we've talked a little bit about the evaluation purposes before when we talked about the 6. Feedback for students, feedback for teachers, information for parents, information for selection, the information for accountability, and then also the incentive for increased student effort. But these evaluation purposes are a little more teacher-driven. You will hear these terms thrown around like crazy in education, and so it's important that you have these solidly understood. Formative and summative assessments are, brother and sister to each other. A formative assessment measures progress along the way, and it's used to inform and correct, so to help students and say, gosh, you don't quite get this part yet, let's work on this. It is an assessment for learning. You'll see the formative there. I use the first first 3 letters there for learning to help me remember it. I'm helping kids learn by using formative assessments. They need to know where they stand and be able to continue to work on something. A diagnostic assessment Usually these are short quizzes or tests, and oftentimes a classic diagnostic tool is a pretest where we as teachers give an assessment so that we can adjust our teaching, so that we can say, oh gosh, all the kids know adverbs, I'm not going to spend the time on that, we'll review it and move on to something else. A diagnostic assessment generally does not go in the grade book. It's a tool for the teacher. It certainly could be used with the student and then becomes more of a formative assessment where you say, hey kids, this is how you did and this is what you know and what you don't know. But diagnostic assessment in itself is really meant to be a tool for the teacher to guide their instruction. Formative assessment, then, the sister or brother to formative assessment, is a summation. It's at the end of learning. It's the end of a unit probably, or the end of several days of lessons, and you're measuring, can the student do these things or not? It is not the kind of tool that you use when you're planning on, oh, they don't get it, let's go back and teach it. It's the kind of tool you use when you say, we're done with this, I need to know where you stand, and I'll let the next teacher know where to continue. Summative is an end to a measure. It's the end of a unit. Formative is the ongoing measurements that you're using along the way.